Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and this week on the Alfarrari we need to finish up that radiator mount. Okay guys, so as you saw last week, we got the front end of this lined up quite nicely, and it's looking quite good. But the bottom radiator mounts you saw me do in a previous week, but there was nothing actually holding it in on the top. So that is something I need to tackle first. So let's pull this quite nicely fitting bonnet off and start having a look at what we're going to do about that. Alright, so those of you might have seen that I mounted up my radiator a couple of weeks ago, made the bottom mounts while I had the front end off of the car so that I could get to everything, and at the moment the top is just swaying in the breeze, so I need to make some way to hold it in nice and securely, give it a bit of space so that the aluminium's not going to rub on the radiator support itself. So I need to work out a way to attach it, and what I've come up with is there's a couple of pegs on the bottom of the radiator facing downwards that are obviously lined up at the bottom. My plan is I need to weld a couple of pegs onto the radiator at the top so that I can actually have some way to grab hold of it. Now I'm looking at this. I could potentially try and weld them into this plate at the top, but I'm not sure how far below this plate the actual fins of the radiator go, and whether I'm going to actually end up damaging a water jacket. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I'm going to actually weld onto these much thicker end tanks, much less likely to create a leak. And even if I did, it's not that big a deal because it's going to be easy enough to touch it up. Whereas if I wreck the fins, yeah, that's not good. So I'm going to get some stock out now and see if I can weld on some tabs onto the top of this radiator. Okay, so I just cut off a couple of bits off of this 10mm round stock aluminium that I had, and I made them up into these pegs. They're about 20mm long. They should be just a nice length for me to make a little cap for the top. I've marked out the center of my end caps and given them a big quick tidy up. So now it's time to get out the TIG welder and give it a go at welding them on. Now, those of you who are watching the working on my 911 the other day will have seen that I had another go at TIG welding the aluminium the other day. I got it there. It's not pretty, but we'll get the job done. So let's start TIG welding. Okay, they're definitely not the prettiest welds, but they're not the worst. Yeah, I think they'll definitely, they're more than hold. They're just a bit bigger and uglier than they need to be. This one over here, similar case. It's a big, ugly blob around this side that's not that great. But we have tabs on the top of the radiator. That is going to do the job and help us move forward. Alright, so now I've got my pegs on the top of my radiator. I need a way to actually hold them in. And that's where I'm going to make up a couple of little bolt-on brackets. So I've just got a piece of sheet metal here that I'm going to, I've already marked it out, the center line of where I want my bolt holes onto this sort of radiator support. And I also marked out where I want my bolt hole or my, my grommet to go over the peg. So now it's time to sort of trim that out, make two of them, and see if I can actually mount these on the car. Okay, so I've got my two brackets. They're made up. I just rounded off the corners, made them nice and pretty. And these have got some captive nuts I've just welded into the radiator support of the car, so that can go over like that. Same on the other side. I've got the two brackets. I've just used a couple of just standard grommets. I bought a universal grommet kit. I'll put a link to something similar in the description. Well worth having for just random grommets. Just on these sort of builds, you always end up needing grommets to run a wire through or to plug a hole or something. So they're fantastic to have, and in this case, they're just a nice handy thing. They work perfectly, and I'm going to paint these up now, and then they're done. So then I actually have a nicely mounted radiator. Okay, so while that stuff is drying up, I'm going to just go through now. There's a couple of bits that I did last week on this. You can see this here. There's some pinholes here, and this metal is very weak and just not good enough. So I'm going to put a patch in here to try and tidy it up and make it look a bit better, and just go over. I think there's a couple of little pinholes and stuff along the sides. Same on the other side. There's just a couple of bits where it's just a bit thin and a bit average, and I want to go through and fix that stuff up. And there we go, that is looking quite nice now. So that's all TIG welded up. I really like the TIG method because it's just so much softer. You can hammer it. The welds actually dent as opposed to the MIG, which would almost break your hammer. And the MIG welds, I've actually found a couple of times on the pillars back here, I actually MIG welded them up. And because they're so thin and small, they've actually cracked through the weld. And I'm gonna have to go through and touch them up again. Whereas the MIG, you can sort of hammer it, and it's more flexible. It's just a nicer weld, and that's gonna take a lot less grinding to bring that back down to shape than if I did that with the MIG. So really liking that method. But now it is time to move over to the other side and do my touch-up patch over here. Well, I'm much happier with those patches. There's a nice solid steel all the way around now. There, I got rid of those sort of flimsy parts, and that patching method works great. So that is a win. So that means the next thing I need to tackle is these headlight buckets, and then hopefully the front end is done. All right, so you can see my brackets here. They all look nice and neat and tidy. They are doing the job perfectly. That is what I wanted. But the last thing I need to do to finish up the nose cone of this car is to actually fit the headlight rings. So these headlight rings need to go in here. They're going to take a little bit of massaging to get them to fit and to manipulate them into the spot, and I need to make sure I get them in the exact right spot, because this is where the headlights obviously need to mount to, and I need to get everything perfect. So let's get out some headlights and start playing with these and see if we can fit them into place. So that was a little bit of going backwards and forwards with the headlight buckets to try and get them reasonably lined up and in place. And now I'm pretty happy with it. I've got my old headlight here that I can just sort of line up into place and get it sitting sort of quite nicely there. So I'm going to just finish lining it all up now and weld them in. Okay, and that is the front end of the car done. I am really happy with how this has all turned out. The headlight buckets are all nice and solid now. The whole front end is together, which means I can move on to more fun, interesting bits and pieces on this car. Although this was a lot of fun. Let's just, while we're here, let's go back and have a bit of a look at the engine, because I want to start pulling some of that down so I can start working out a bit of a plan there. All right, I thought it was about time to have a bit of a closer look at the engine itself. So those of you who are following earlier on will have seen that I talked about turning the, I need to take these plenums off and turn them around to face the other way so that the inlets are actually at the front of the engine. I also need to cut down the runners on this engine. Now, cutting down the runners is not ideal. Basically what long runners do is long runners help contribute to giving you a better bottom end response on an engine. So reducing the length of the runners are going to take away from that bottom end sort of torque level. There will be a compromise in that, but there's not a lot of easy ways around it, and this engine is still going to have plenty of torque for this tiny little car. So I'm not too concerned about that, to be honest. There were lots of comments that people said about putting individual throttle bodies on this engine, and yes, you could definitely put individual throttle bodies on this engine, but I really like the look of this plenum, and it's also the only thing on it that says Ferrari. And if I'm going to all the expense of putting Ferrari engine in, it would be nice to be immediately obvious that it is actually a Ferrari engine, particularly as it's not cheap. And as I said, I think they look really cool anyway. Oh, there were other really bad comments about converting this thing to carbies, and there's no way I'm going to ruin this engine with carbies. Yes, you can get carbies to run quite well with a lot of hair pulling and stuff, as those have seen on my Datsun. No, thank you. I don't need that headache. EFI is a much better system. There's a reason we don't use carbies anymore, because the EFI is better. That is definitely what I'm going to be sticking with is on this engine. So let's start pulling some of this apart a little bit so I can give you a bit of an idea and show you what we're actually dealing with, and show you why cutting these down is not as big a deal as what it at first appears. So now these covers are off, you can see all these beautiful bell mouths in here, and I'll give you a bit of a run through of why me cutting down the length of these runners is not going to make as big a difference as it first appears, because as you can see here, even though this is only an 8-cylinder, there are 16 bell mouths. That's because these bell mouths here, actually, when the car is at idle and at low revs, it's using this bell mouth here running along through this runner and down into the cylinder on the opposite side. So all the way along, they're taking the air in and going across to the opposite side. So this one here, you can see comes through that tube there and then goes down into this runner. When it gets up on higher revs, as you can see in there, there's some butterflies in there, and what happens is they open up and the air goes straight down, so it's got an easier access. So it's a variable inlet system, and as you can see, the length of the runner is a very long inlet runner, much longer than I could ever get if I put individual throttle bodies on it. It also is another reason why I can't separate these two. a lot of people looked at the covers and said, oh, why don't you just move one onto one side and one onto the other side? It doesn't work that way. That's how this works. So my cutting them down is going to lose a little bit of the bottom end, but it's still only probably taking out 20% of the length of the runner, if that. So it's not as big of a difference as what it initially appears. So underneath is a different situation. So you can see that there is a reasonable amount of room there. Now I want to try and take about 60 mil out of the height of this plenum to try and get it to sit down under the bonnet or as close to as I can. Now I'm going to have to remove the oil filter, which is going to be very difficult to get to in any case if I did leave it here, because the firewall of the car is right here. So it's going to be quite hard to get in and get that out. So that's changing oil filters is quite a simple thing. So I can just put a adapter plate on here and run an oil filter off somewhere else, and I might even run an oil cooler as well to keep the oil temperatures nice and low on this engine. But most of it seems like there's actually quite a bit of room there, and I shouldn't have too much trouble from lowering down this this whole system. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and remove the injector rails and then try and unbolt the whole top plenum assembly itself, take it off and see what we can do about modifying it. Well, that is a bit of a win, because I was questioning the whole time about whether when I cut the plenum, I would have to cut it and spin it around, whether it would line up or what have you. Regardless of that, the plenum actually fits back on the other way around, so that is perfect. So this is now facing the other way. The inlets are facing towards the front of the engine now, and that is one thing that was a bit of a relief. So I want to make up a jig to hold, to basically bolt the lower part of this these runners down so it's solid and it can't warp and move. So then I can cut this off and cut the chunk out of the middle and then weld it back together again. That is my plan moving forward. But that is all the time I have today. So I think that means it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, in 1969, Autodata completely revised its Tipo 33 race car for the Tipo 33-3. This new design did away with the old true frame chassis and incorporated a stiffer box-sectioned monocoque. They also decided to aim for overall wins rather than just the class wins they had previously, so they enlarged the engine to a 3-litre V8 with 400 horsepower. It also lost its roof, but it was still heavier than the previous car. Despite all this work, the car proved unsuccessful against the Porsche 908 and the Ferrari 312Ps. In 1971, although it kept the Tipo 33-3 name, the car was completely revised with more power and squared off bodywork. Finally, this chassis was successful, bringing home Alfa's first Targa Florio win since 1950 and ending Porsche's 5-year winning streak.
Alright guys, and today we have another episode of Mail Time, and today I've got a letter come in here from Canada, so let's just have a quick look. Hi Jeff, been watching your channel for a while. I live up here in Vancouver area, British Columbia, Canada. Just love your videos. You've encouraged me to get out in the shop more frequently. Of course now we get even more shop time. I've enclosed a magnetic decal from our club, which is, we're a closed underground group that enjoys long distance road trips about 4 or 5 times a year, similar to my recent Tassie trip. The group 9 is because 9 or no in German. So we're the no group, no politics, no BS, no effing rules, unlike another club they once belonged to. So the group has some 20 members throughout Canada, 1 member in Hong Kong who makes the annual trip to join them. They range from mid-30s to mid-70s and all get along great. Best part is they like to drive and find the remote twisties and push their Porsches. And that's Charlie Van Ditmars. So thank you very much, Charlie. And this is their secret logo, the Group 9 logo. So that is going to take pride of place up on the wall. And if any of you guys have got anything you want to send through to stick on my wall from wherever you are in the world or anything else, send it through to Home Built by Jeff, PO Box 1520, Bowral, New South Wales 2576, Australia. The front end of the car is finally all together. I'm so happy that it's come together nicely, and it's now a complete car again, which is
With eyes.
with eyes. Hopefully you're enjoying the process, and
Please like, subscribe, and if you want to see the videos a day earlier, there's Patreon. Otherwise, we will see you next week.
See you next week, guys. See ya.
Oh, that's cool. You have all the cool stuff, don't you? Hey guys, in 1960, Typo 33 race completely revised its Typo 33 holy Porsche 908s and the Ferraris 312Ps. They're enlarged. So rude.